What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast. And today, my esteemed guest is Michael C. Anderson. Hello, Mr. Anderson.
Hello, how are you?
I am sensational. This is going to be a super wonderful topic. You could take me down so many different rabbit holes of different things you've done in your life. And I'm just going to introduce you real quick if I can, and we'll fire away.
Sure.
Cool. All right. Well, guys, we've got Mr. Michael Anderson. Michael has been writing about politics since 2005. He's published 4 books since 2017, and he has a new book out, which is called American Political. It's about the American political system. Michael's focus has been political morality, which is the beliefs people have about how government should operate. A successful democracy must have a consensus on government action. The current tribalist state in America is a barrier to consensus. Michael's 5th book will discuss elites' control of the American political system. Wealthy families have partnered with major corporations to control the American government. They do this by lobbying, placing their representatives in government positions, and controlling the media. Hallelujah. Ain't that the truth?
Right.
So, welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really grateful for you being here. I love your stuff.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yep. So I just, I like we chatted about earlier. I don't have a lot of questions. I just want to hear what you have to say. But again, because we're the What If You Could podcast, I just open with that one question. Mr. Michael Anderson, what's your what if you could? Have you had a what if you could in your life?
Yes, I have, and it's the desire to use my creativity in a positive way. Um, as I mentioned to you when we talked briefly, I've always been a technical person. I mean, I always liked math and science, sort of STEM oriented. Um, didn't think about anything after high school other than engineering. So I went to Case Institute of Technology in Cleveland and got a chemical engineering degree. And so that that was fitted in with my personality, left brain driven, analytical, that stuff. And the political angle to that is that engineers design solutions for people that are practical. Obviously, you know that you design a bridge, you design a whatever it is. Engineers don't like wasting money or wasting design or anything. And so the impact on my political views of my engineering is that I don't like impractical government. I don't like bureaucracy. I don't like the government wasting money. I'm appalled when people say things like, "We better read the bill so we can see what's in it." I mean, that's just unbelievable. So,
That's the famous Nancy Pelosi
yeah,
Obamacare line. Yeah, it's only
exactly.
27,000 pages. Don't worry
Yeah,
about it. We'll be
ex-
okay.
yeah, it will be good because people took the care to write exactly what we need. So, no matter what my genetic politics are, they're influenced by, and not that I'm the only one like this. There's an awful lot of people like this, influenced by promoting efficient government. And one of the beefs I have with the left is the welfare state that they want to build. They don't take into account the fact that you can't, if you build enough with government, it isn't effective. Example, you probably have heard this. $24 billion spent in the last 10 years in LA on homelessness. Zero impact.
Zero.
Zero.
They can't
Why?
even tell you where the money went. They can't
Right.
even tell you how many porta potties. How many porta potties do you get for $24 billion?
Right. Right. And I mean, they probably could tell us, but they don't want to because it went to middlemen, uh, political hacks, and all those, filter down and it's all gone at the end, uh, kind of people. So that's an example of the appalling performance of government. And then the governor gets up and he talks about it and he can't really understand why it didn't work. So we'll try something else. Anyway, so that is the engineer part of me, the practical government thing. And I mean, an awful lot of people are libertarian, and libertarians are classic liberals in the sense that they want to see small government because, first of all, they don't want government intruding on their lives. And second of all, large government is inefficient and wastes money. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway,
How does that work? How does that work in your brain though? You've got that engineering brain, which is very, detailed, very disciplined, very analytical. But then you're a writer. I mean, writers aren't really known for being any of those things. They're more foo-foo out there, more creative minded. How did you put those two together?
well, first of all, I was driven to write because you can't use creativity in the IT business. I mean, I started out as software engineer, et cetera, and then I eventually, I mean, what I do now is I manage a team of engineers that do infrastructure work. So, but that is has zero creativity. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a recipe in a recipe book. Fix this. This is how you fix it. Somebody else does it, and I just manage it. So I've been frustrated with that for, well, probably before I started writing, more than 20 years ago. But what can you do about it if you make decent money and that's your education, your profession? You're going to keep doing it as long as you need to.
Yeah.
Um, my ability to be creative was limited by having a family. Obviously, I have two kids, and they had to be raised and grow up and go to college and leave home, and that opened up a lot of potential time for me to write. Although when I first started writing, my kids were 12 and 14, so they weren't completely out of the house, but I did it anyway. It's just found the time to do it. So, um, but I mean, in writing nonfiction, you have to be, I mean, I'm trained as an academic. I have a PhD. So you're trained to do research, arrive at the truth through research by looking at all of the work that's been done and sifting through it and figuring out what's the truth, which is much more difficult these days than it used to be since there are so many lies everywhere. There is no truth.
Yeah.
So,
And to find it is even more challenging because not only is there no truth, there's actually purposeful mistruths
yeah,
that they place there. So not only can you not find the truth, they purposely put things out there that completely are untrue. So you're
yep.
really, hard pressed to find either.
Yep. There's so many roads we could go down with this discussion, and we'll go where we need to go. But your statement makes me recall. I have a chart in one of my books. I think it's book four, maybe. A survey done of journalists, and you're old enough. I think you're not as old as me, but you're old enough to know when journalism was legit, and then it became corrupted by politics, and when the academic world turned to the left, journalists went with them. And most journalists, I mean, I think 5% of journalists are conservative, something like that. But the chart I have in my fourth book is there was a survey of journalists and what percent, uh, well, the actual question was, how important do you think it is for journalists to give both sides of an issue? 62% said it isn't important to give both sides. There you have it.
There you have it in a nutshell. And you know what's even more disgusting is how incestuous it's all become.
Right.
Like the husband is the head of ABC, and then the wife's a journalist, and then the wife's brother works for, is a professor, and then this one works for the White House, and it's like, wait a minute, it's all so incestuous now too, how they're all intertwined with each other in
Yeah,
this whole coven of snakes. It's just the most
yeah, that's
bizarre
the
thing.
billionaire thing. And I mean, now you brought me forward to the fifth book, but um, the power elite, I didn't invent that word. It was invented by C. Wright Mills, who was a sociologist who wrote a book called The Power Elite in 1956. But I use that as a jumping off point to bring it up to current day. Um, and this has gotten worse. The billionaires have more control than they've ever had. And they have control because of the reasons that you brought up, which are from my book. Um, they own or influence major international corporations. Some they own. I mean, Walmart or some, take example like that. Some they're on the boards of, and some they influence. Um, there are 400 richest families in this country own 60% of the wealth. There you go.
Yeah.
So, um, the billionaires have been connected, very closely connected to the corporate world. And so they use the corporate world to influence America. So they do it by funding candidates. They do it by taking positions in the executive branch, like Secretary of the Treasury or whatever. And if you do, to your point, if you do an analysis of these people, these interchangeable parts, this incestuous group, um, the number one indicator of whether you're in the elite class or not is if you went to prep school. Almost everyone went to prep school. Almost everyone went to an Ivy League school. Their resumes are strikingly similar. They were either in the corporate world, a consultant, a politician, or worked at a think tank, probably more than one of those things. And so if you read the resumes of the cabinet uh, heads, that's what you see. So there's this feeder mechanism from the power elite to, first of all, they determine who gets to join them. So there's a process, like if you're executive vice president of a corporation, you do a great job and you get to CEO or whatever, then you might be able to get in the power elite. Um, so they have to replace the ones that are gone. Now, interesting about the power elite is it has both parties in it. It's party agnostic. And at first you hear that and you go, well, how could that be? Because aren't they going to fight for each other over with each other in politics? No, because their goals as billionaires is more important to them than which party controls.
Their party is power.
Right, their party is power. Yep. So they have a sort of a tacit agreement. Well, you guys can win this election, and we'll win the next, and we'll alternate. It's all good.
Yeah. Because it doesn't matter. I wanted to dig into that deep because America's Confederate democracy,
Counterfeit.
rule of the power elite. But I want to go back to tribalism. I want to go
Okay.
back to your book Tribalism because I think you would agree that kind of one goes, has to do a lot with the other. And I think, you know, people don't realize, or hopefully some people realize that the COVID, the pandemic, literally was the most massive transfer of wealth in the history of the world. These people just got so much more power and wealth. And in the meantime, we're these knuckleheads down there with the tribalism just fighting each other while they're
Yeah.
all just,
Right.
going crazy. It's nuts.
Yep. Well, let's talk about tribalism. So, uh, the theme of my first three books, I wrote a book. My first book was about how the left thinks. My third book's about how the right thinks, and then I interrupted the writing of the two companion books by writing the tribalism book in between because it was Trump's in the middle of Trump's term and everything was happening, and I had to write about it. But the discussion starts with the fact that the differences between the right and left. Before I started doing any research, I was always scratching my head about why did the right and left not get along? Why can't there be consensus in government? Blah, blah, blah. So then I read Jonathan Haidt's book. Don't know if you've read it, The Righteous Mind, published in 2012. I can give you the reference for it. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist at NYU in the psychology department. And the purpose of his book was to identify the genetic differences between the left and right. He was the first one to do it. And there's been a lot of research done since then that supports that. But basically, he identified 6 different behavioral characteristics that exist in human beings that live in America, because America is a little different than some of the other countries. And you can identify who's right or who's left by taking a test answering questions about these characteristics. And to summarize that quickly for you, and these are things that'll be obvious to you when because you observe the world. The left has an infatuation with equality. They are group focused and they are very sensitive to inequality. And so their mission in life is to create equality either through the welfare state, implementation of socialism, or whatever it takes.
But don't you find that it's equality on their terms, not
Oh,
equality?
sure, sure, sure. It's equality in there too, because among the other characteristics of those on the left is, and it's interesting to compare the conservatives with that because they're opposite usually. The left believes that people don't have control over their lives, so therefore there have to be experts. And so the experts, like the in the COVID, in case of the COVID pandemic, the experts will tell us that we have to shut down, and we'll gladly do whatever they tell us to do because they're the experts. Um, they also think they're smarter than conservatives, and they also think they're always right. So they don't admit that the conservatives could have a single logical thought in their brain. So that's their position generally. Um, but they're focused on, Haidt calls it caring, but it's really equality and fairness. They don't like unfairness. Um, People on the right are more interested in loyalty. They're very loyal. They're interested in authority. They respect authority. Conservatives do not believe that socialism can work because the natural operation of the human society is hierarchical. I mean, since back in prehistoric times, groups of humans have been dominated by those who are either smarter, stronger, or sneakier, better salesmen than everybody else. And that's the way people are. And in a group, there's a large number of people in the group who don't want to be a leader. They're happy being followers. That's fine. So uh, on the right, it's loyalty, authority. The right is also a fifth characteristic is called sanctity, which means the right tends to be, first of all, tends to be more religious, but tends to value traditions. And so that's the sanctity part of it.
You know what's interesting about that is when it came down to voting. It's like the left was totally cool with voting 2 months before an election to start mail-in ballots and all this crap, to start voting. I mean, they keep pushing it further and further out from November 4th, right? It's
Yeah,
madness. And
yeah,
the right was pretty like, look, we vote on election day. We
yeah,
go to the polls on election day and vote, right? So
yeah,
we were already, not we, but the right was already millions of votes behind the left on election day because the left has no problem being told that it's okay to vote in an election 6 weeks before the election. right? And then you see the right
Yep.
going, well, that's not how it goes. We should stay loyal
Yep.
to the
Yep.
system, right?
Yep.
That didn't work.
So, so I described, the differences between right and left a bit. This actually goes, the differences actually goes back to prehistoric times when man first migrated out of Africa. He encountered multiple ecosystems that were unfamiliar to him and had to learn to adapt to situations where there was a good food supply or no food supply. And so he adapted. There's a term in genetics called polymorphism, which means it's the expression of a single gene two different ways. For example, eye color is polymorphic. Everybody has an iris that's a different color, but it's the same gene that determines it, but it generates different colors. Another example is dimorphism between men and women. Men and women have the same genetics, but men are bigger and women are smaller. So that's a different expression, polymorphic expression. So the same thing can happen in behavior. And so man developed adaptive behaviors. One group was the hunters, and the other group was the managers. So the hunters hunted when there was no food, and the managers managed when there was a lot of food. The hunters became liberals, and the managers became conservatives because the conservatives valued traditions and they were better, more conscientious. They were better at managing food. The hunters, like the liberals, like change. They like to travel. They don't like the status quo. And so that's their particular view of the world. So you had these two groups. And so in a egalitarian society where you're hunting for food, there is no hierarchy. There's a tribal leader or whatever. And they made decisions about whether to hunt or whether they had enough food based on consensus. So that's why those traits developed. And then they sort of went dormant when governments started responding to the production of agriculture for the first time. Agriculture generated cities, generated governments. Governments are generally run by conservatives because of the model of loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And since liberals are more attuned to equality, there was no equality. There were no rights. So for most of civilized history, conservatives ruled until the Enlightenment. When the Enlightenment occurred, people got rights for the first time. The individual was recognized as valuable as opposed to the group. Capitalism started, politics started, political parties started, elected officials started, and all that. So then the world got divided between left and right, between conservative, status quo, value traditions, and I want to change things because they should be changed. So there you have the two groups. This is genetically determined. You're genetically, well, 50% of your political beliefs are genetic. The other half is behavioral. I, for example, am a guaranteed genetic conservative because I love history. I love traditions and reading about history and all that. And I'm happy with the status quo. And that doesn't mean that I don't accept change. It's just I'm happy with the status quo. So you have this tension between the left and right in the postmodern era. One wants change and the other wants less change. Uh, to the left, we can't change fast enough, as you've noticed. I mean, we did homosexuality and then we did feminism, then homosexuality, then same sex marriage, and now it's trans. So, they're wanting equality on all issues. They prefer to have every single person in our country be able to exercise their free will in whatever way they want without impediments, which is impossible,
Do
of course.
you do you think that for because let's face it, I mean, America is the last man standing, last domino. I mean, America's the only thing that stands in the way of complete I don't know, World Economic Power, Davos, whoever's doing all this. We'll probably talk about that in your most recent book. But when they took the gals and said, "Look, we're sick. You don't want to be slaves to your husband and your house and your children anymore. You need to be free and get out, go work. You need to become your own person and leave this whole slavehood of being a housewife. Get in the workforce, right? And
Yeah,
then and then since you can't take your kid, why don't we just take your kid for you 12 hours a day and we'll just put your little kid in the indoctrination camp." And then I mean, do you think it's sped up since then, the tribalism? I mean, because you're talking about thousands of years of history, millions
right.
maybe, right? So do you think just, I mean, in the last 70 years, it's just really gone hyperspeed?
Well, tribalism, as I define it in my book, didn't really exist until Obama, to be honest. Although you can go back, you can look at the mid '90s when Clinton was president and and Newt Gingrich was speaker, and that was the point where, and you're very familiar with what I'm about to say. There used to be moderates in Congress, and there were left moderates and right moderates, and basically their role was to reconcile the differences between the extremes and get work done. They all left, and the only ones left are the extremes.
That
So
that may have been that may have been the last time in American history where the right and the left actually worked together.
yeah,
Was Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton. I didn't vote for Clinton in his first term, but I did vote for him his second term. I didn't care if he was getting blowjobs in his office. I could care less. I
right.
thought that he worked well to get stuff done,
He did.
and then it just completely blew up. I mean, it just completely went away. I think with the Gore Bush debacle, with the hanging chads and all of that, and then like you said, once Obama got there, he was the most divisive person to ever be president of the United States. It was amazing.
Yeah, yep. Um, so let's go back to the basic construction of the brains of the right and left for a second. The role of the right in life, and I write this, written this more than once, is to keep a brake on the left, basically. And if you use the example back in the prehistoric days, if the left was able to hunt whenever they wanted, they'd all be killed by wild animals. If the right was managing food all the time, and if you only had righties, you'd never look for food. If you only had lefties, you'd all be dead. So the point of that is consensus. These we have been given these behaviors that lead us to different views of politics, political morality, and the notion on either side that they're right and the other is wrong, and they have to institute themselves across our society without the input of the other half is criminal. I mean, it can't possibly work. That's why the Biden years will go down in history as crazy, because never before in our country has a radical agenda, a radical platform been implemented. And the only reason it was implemented is because Joe lied to the American people. He made a deal with the radical progressives. Okay, if you help me get in, here's what we'll do. But he didn't tell anybody.
Well, but think about how much more simple and sinister it was by having the cover of "I'm going to save you all from this deadly virus." And
Right.
so you're all going to cow down to whatever we say to do so we can keep you alive so we don't have another winter of darkness and death. And but then we're going to carry that into everything. We're just going to make the pandemic, we're going to govern everything based on the pandemic because we can, because no one, we can do whatever we want. It was the most insane thing I've ever seen.
Right. But we took much of it happened before the pandemic. The university, higher education was taken over by the left starting in the 70s. It was done by the 2000s, and continues to be radical. I mean, the when you think back to the hippie days, which I was alive then, and they were trying to agitate for their rights to speak. And now they're the ones preventing conservatives from going to a college campus and speaking. The ultimate irony.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, remember it was peace, love, rock and roll, peace, sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever. Don't tread on me. Don't, I'm gonna do my thing. Stick it to the man.
yeah,
It was like we want freedom to do what we want, right? And then those people are now
the establishment.
the establishment. They've completely flipped, and I have a couple of really good friends of mine that are completely liberal. They keep trying to kick me out as a friend and unfriend me and get rid of me, but I won't go away because I love them as people. But I mean,
Yeah,
I tell them that all the time. I go, dude, you're almost 70. You're a freaking hippie. What happened? What,
right.
what happened? It's bizarre.
Okay, so higher education got flipped. Then um, the media got flipped. Traditional media went left. Then social media appears. Was all left to start with because it's coming out of Silicon Valley. And the Silicon Valley progressives are all heavy lefties. They're globalists. They're left of most everybody in the Democratic Party. Um, and I'll pause here for a second to mention that I think that social media was maybe the worst thing to infect mankind in our history because, first of all, it can't be controlled now. It can't be censored. There's no way to censor it. There's no way to, unless, we never appoint court to the Democrats, they want to be the censors. And so, that to have a fair censorship is impossible. But the thing that riles me most is that 25 years ago, if you had a crackpot theory or ideology, you wanted to express yourself, you stood on a soapbox in a park and yelled it out. Now, a mentally ill idiot can expound his philosophy to millions of people on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere. And if what he says is interesting enough, he'll enhance the platform's advertising revenue. So there's an incentive for the platform to support those people, which is unbelievably bad.
And I think it's even more sinister because it's not just giving a voice to the crazies, it's creating the crazies. And
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
it's it's especially this we've lost an entire generation of children
Yep.
because social media has now, and I don't know if you saw this, um, what they did where they can prove that they can get 10 kids to be able to commit suicide. Did you see that sick
No.
research they did? So they took, I think it was either TikTok or it was one of these, I don't know. So they said, based on their postings and what they write, oh, I'm so sad, I've had a bad day, or this is going on, or I'm fat, or whatever. They go, okay, we've found people, right? And then they will zoom in on these kids. It was 1,000 or whatever. And then they said, all right, well, let's start sending them stuffs about how bad they really are, how they should feel bad. And you've
Yeah.
got no friends. And fake girls saying, oh, you're fat and ugly and you got pimples, you can never get a date. And then
Yeah.
let's start posting stuff about, suicide might be the answer. You're not
Yeah.
even worth being here. And they got kids to the point where they could take them to suicide, make them suicidal. And
Yeah.
it's the most evil, disgusting thing. And it's so that just shows how easy social media now can take these kids and say, "You're not a boy. You're definitely a girl. You
Yeah.
need to cut all your body parts off and become a girl because that's what we're doing now, and it's cool." It's madness.
Even though it makes me cringe, I like what Australia did. I'm interested to see what'll happen. Banning social media under
Yeah,
16
yeah.
because the only way you're going to, I mean, this is kind of the thing about people never save money and they overeat and don't exercise. It's the same thing. If they're exposed to social media, whatever is the lowest common denominator, they'll expose themselves to.
Yeah.
It amazed me when I found out the stuff that's on YouTube. Like there are people on YouTube that eat a meal and they have a million people watching them eat. Or they're kids that get on there and watch other kids play with their toys. They're not playing with their toys, they're watching other kids play with their. How nuts is that?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're going to be
I
a
mean,
human being,
and they can influence them to say, listen, I'm going to show you how to eat and then go throw up. So you can eat
yeah,
all you want and never gain weight. You could be bulimic like me. And they're like,
yeah,
oh, cool. And it gets a million views. And you think,
yeah,
wait a minute, that's complete insanity. But
yeah.
where do we draw the line between censorship, free speech, and trying to protect people from themselves? I don't know. I mean, where do you draw the line?
I
Who?
don't think it's possible because I mean, Facebook. First of all, you know about Section 530 of the Communications Act in 1994 and all that. So they're supposed to be impartial platforms, and they avoid getting sued because they just put up content. Well, that lasted about 5 minutes because once they started beheading people on there, they figured out they were going to have to do something about it. And I really can't imagine how many people Facebook has checking everything that's on there. Or, I mean, they rely on algorithms, I'm sure, but who wrote those algorithms and who tuned those algorithms to look at things one way and not another? So it's an unsolvable problem, unfortunately, except you had to take away the media. I don't know. I mean, you take away the
But they
phone.
did a great job with your right and left with your tribalism, though. I mean, Zuckerberg finally came out and admitted something we all knew,
Yeah.
which was, dude, you had your thumb on the scale in the 2020 election.
Yeah.
You took down things that were absolutely true because it affected the other side. We know you did it. We saw you did it. We watched you do it. Now you come out and admit it, but you're not changing your ways. So I mean, when it made it even tougher for your tribalism, right? For your right and your left to get along when the game's not being played fair anymore.
Yep. Yep. So here's the other thing. So, we were talking about how this comes about. So it's when we talked about control of higher education, we talked about control of the media by the left, we talked about social media being left oriented. The farther the right gets pushed by the left for change, the more the right reacts. Conservatives do not like combat. Conservatives would rather live their lives. They feel they have control over their lives. They can make something out of their own life. They don't need government, but they don't want to have all their traditions torn down. So we got more tribal as the pressure increased from the left. And then when you add a socialist progressive agenda, which was Biden's, we'll let everybody in the country. Then we'll have more workers. Um, it, it put it over the edge.
Yeah. I
Now,
think when you had finally you had the brilliant move by Texas and Florida and shipping these people to blue states
yeah,
and saying, listen, you you can allow the media to try to convince you all day long that nothing's going on because in your little utopian bubble there isn't anything going on. So we need to bring this to your doorstep. And I think the most classic hysterical is when they sent them all to Martha's Vineyard and
yeah,
Martha's Vineyard just lost their mind
they did. Yeah.
and just shipped him right out of there. But you've got some mayors. I mean, like Mayor Adams trying to save
Yes.
his skin,
God
stepping
bless
up.
him for what he's doing. I mean, I don't care about whether he convicted a crime during his election campaign or not. I don't really care about, but he is at least honest enough, probably because he's an ex-cop, to see what how things really are.
But Michael, they didn't find his crime
Right.
until he crossed the line and started
Yeah,
speaking out against
exactly.
Biden and the left not doing anything. All of a sudden, he says, "You're killing my city." And the next day, we found some crimes, dude.
Yeah.
They're either going to give you've done some illegal things, or you're a sexual predator and we found child porn on your computer. It's
Yeah.
going to be one of those two things if you step out of line. But then you've got whack jobs like Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Chicago
Yeah.
and the guy in Colorado. It's like, are you people out of your mind? Honestly, how many what's how much does has to happen before you wake up to what's going on?
Well, you're citing evidence of an echo chamber that becomes the echo grows and they're more isolated. And so it perpetuates itself. The other thing I was going to mention about the tribalism thing, that we go more tribal when people who are not politically engaged or are easily influenced um, decide that they need to be in a tribe because people don't like to be by themselves. They want to be in a tribe. And so they match up a tribe with their general beliefs and then they join the tribe. So the tribes get bigger. The tribes started as ideologues only, radical right, radical left. But then they grow as they absorb people who find either one of them attractive. So then that leaves fewer people in the middle and the tribes grow, which makes it more difficult to undo the tribes. Leading me to a question you might ask, which is in your tribalism book, did you make any recommendations on how we could stop it?
That would be the next obvious next question, but I was going to see if you fixed it in the next book.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Uh, I recommend it. I suggested that three things could cause a change. Number one, a 9/11 experience, which I don't want to have us experience, but if there's a overall threat to us as a country from wherever, we would come together in about 15 minutes and forget about what we're fighting over. Number two is fatigue. I mean, when it comes down to it, you could have a logical conversation with people and say, is it really more important to argue about your ideology than have the country move forward? Or is it really more important to argue about your ideology than have your family at Thanksgiving dinner? I'll never understand that because when ideology surpasses family ties, it's out of control,
Yeah.
and that's where we are.
So what's the third one?
Third one is a grassroots consensus develops. Um, I belong to an organization that is a grassroots consensus building organization called Braver Angels, and they have local chapters in every city in the country. And what you do if you're a member is you go to monthly meetings, and half the group are Democrats and half the group are Republicans. And you pair off into one Democrat, one Republican, and you debate the issues and you seek consensus, which is much easier than you imagine because most people are reasonable. All we read about is the extremes. We don't read about reasonable people. And 80% of the people in the United States are reasonable. Um, there's about 12 million radical left and about 12 million radical right, 20 million, whatever number, 40 million out of 330 million. And the rest of us are subject to the whims of these two arguing over everything that means nothing. Because back to my engineering, if you don't execute practical politics, in other words, pass laws that are effective, then what do you have? You don't have a government. And where did Trump come from? Trump came from the fact that our government was ineffective.
Mhm.
The canary in the coal mine for poor politics is either a populist or a third party. Unfortunately, third parties can't function in our society because the deck's stacked against them. They don't have any funding and they can't build any funding. And the two parties attacked them. Look what was done to RFK Jr. He was sued in every state he applied to be on the ballot in. He was sued for a whole, but they did everything, lawfare on RFK Jr. from his own party.
Yeah, yeah. And I think Trump was such. I mean, I think people weren't real happy the fact that just it was Hillary's turn. We were just
Yeah,
supposed to all just bow down and throw rose petals at Hillary's feet because it was her turn after Obama, right? And then you've got all the normal guys. You got the Jed Bushes, you got the Chris Christies, you got all the regular
yeah.
rhinos lining up, right? And there was like 18 of them. There's a whole heck of them, a lot
Romney.
of them that year,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
then here comes Trump like a train wreck. And he's like, screw you. I'm just going to cut my own checks. I got billions of
yeah,
dollars laying around.
yeah.
You guys, I don't want any donation. I don't want a pack. I don't want any of you guys to do anything, right? And it blew their mind. And as the dominoes kept falling and he kept getting closer, the panic was unbelievable. Not like 2024. 2024 was complete madness. I've never seen a government so weaponized in my life like they did in 2024. But in 2016, man, they did not see that coming at all.
So you're calling weaponized the fact that all they did was two impeachments, two assassination attempts, and seven criminal indictments?
No.
That's not.
I've got a very good family member that I love to death. He's just one of my favorite family members. He was my past wife's cousin, but I won't mention the name, but he knows what I'm talking about. He's an attorney, very smart guy. He is that 12% crazy left.
Yeah,
Um, and I said, dude, you're an attorney, all right? Let's say he was your client. Are you trying to tell me that you don't think it's a little convenient that every one of these cases dropped at the same time in these states for bullshit stuff that they had to change law, they had to change state laws in New York to even bring some of these cases? I'm like, you don't think there's a little bit there? Oh no, no, no. It just if that's how they fall, that's how they fall. I'm like,
I can't believe he said that because every one of those cases, if it wouldn't have been Trump, it never would have been brought. And,
never.
and when Bragg ran, or not Bragg, Letitia, when she ran, she said, "We're going to get Trump. That's why I'm running. That's my platform."
They had to change the state laws to allow Carol to bring her case. Well, she didn't bring her case back. They brought it back for her, but
Yeah,
literally they had to change the laws of the state specifically aimed at Trump. And the bozo, the creepy pedo judge who say you owe $500 million
yeah.
without any victims, without any crime, with willing lenders who will still do business with this man. You say we owe a $500 million with no jury, nothing, and that's acceptable to people?
Yeah, it's amazing. That was the most egregious case of all because
Yes.
he inflated. Okay, so he inflated the value of his properties, but they have his banker and the witness stand. He goes, "Well, we didn't go by his numbers anyway. We get our own, and we still."
Michael, I'm a real estate broker for 35 years. How many times do you think I've gone into a seller's home to sit down and talk about listing price and they said, "We think it's worth less." It
Right,
said you say it's worth 200, I say it's worth 500. I'm like, "I know. Everybody does. Now let's get to a real number so you can sell your house, right?"
right.
Everyone thinks your properties are worth more, but at the end there's an appraisal done. There's documents done. It's complete madness to me that anybody who owns a property could look at this and say, "Yeah, that makes sense." I can come back years later and say that he overvalued. It was madness to me.
Yeah,
A $500 million?
yeah.
In any case, so so with the tribalism and with the fighting, I think that just plays so well into your next book, America's Counterfeit Democracy, because truly, I think 2024 was what you were talking about, where people were just exhausted. So, like,
Yeah.
Biden was a complete disaster. This DEI stuff's a disaster. Our kids are being wiped out by social media and transgenderism. The inflation, there's so many things wrong now that you guys shove down our throat. I'm exhausted. I don't even like Trump, but I'm going to vote for him, right? And I think we hit that, but think of how much bigger that would have been if the media and the billionaires and the corporations who are afraid of Trump weren't so powerful, right? It would have been a Reagan-esque landslide.
Yep. I went to the Republican convention and I worked there as a volunteer. Wasn't there politically. Uh, but I went there to meet as many people as I could because it was the mothership. And I thought, well, I could interview some people. I interviewed 8 different people. But I had lunch with the man who was running Trump's campaign, not the campaign manager, the operations guy. And I said, who's Trump's biggest enemy? You may or may not be shocked by the answer. The Republican establishment. Because the Republican establishment is as bad as the Democrat establishment. This is book 5, because they just want their little perfect world to continue. Billionaires have 2 goals in life. One is to get richer, and the other is have our country be stable so the riches aren't threatened. So everything they do is to those 2 purposes. They don't care what the public wants. They're happy to tell the public what they want or to tell them that things are going great. They just think they're bad when they really aren't. Like the inflation thing. You guys just don't understand how good the economy is.
You guys are just too stupid to know that
Yeah.
when prices go up 75% in 2 years, it's because you're just stupid. And a guy like Mitch McConnell, what he's done in the Senate is criminal. I mean,
Yep.
that guy is almost as bad as Chuck Schumer. There's not a, and that's saying a lot. The
Yeah.
Pelosi's and the Schumer, but Mitch McConnell, like you said, these entrenched Republicans are absolutely horrible. I mean, that's why people always say to me, "Well, you're just a stupid Republican. You just care about the Republicans. That's what your problem is." I go, "Dude, no, I don't like any of them. I don't trust any of them." Are you kidding
But
me?
it's easy to figure out who the establishment is. It's Liz Cheney, Romney, the Lincoln Project, the Never Trumpers. Those are all people who are activists for the Republican establishment,
How
trying to
about
ruin
Liz
Trump.
Cheney? How does Liz Cheney become a hero of the left? That is the most bizarre thing to me of
The
all of this
enemy of my
problem.
enemy is my friend.
Yeah, that's right. They hate Trump so much that they'll bring the Cheney family in.
Right.
Yeah, that one was really that one was hysterical to me. When I saw her become the hero of the left, I mean, I've got 6 books on her dad right here about what a war criminal that guy was, and the whole Cheney family is bad. It was that one was pretty amazing.
I got a question for you, and because I don't really think I know the answer. Maybe you do. How did the Biden administration become neocon? Because that I thought neocons died with Bush Jr. because of the Iraq War. And I thought they were dead and buried. Now suddenly they're neocons running the Democratic Party. It's crazy.
It's because your billionaires need war.
Yeah.
War creates money, and
Yep.
Europe is a completely soulless, rudderless continent. No one is running Europe. Europe's a disaster. So
It
the
is.
easy fixing is the Middle East is always easy. Those guys can throw a hand grenade into the Middle East at any time, start any conflict, and make tons of money. But when the people running the place, and we know it's not Biden, Biden has not one day been president. So whoever's doing this, their first move was Afghanistan. Let's completely destabilize the Middle East with Afghanistan. And then we need more Russia, Russia, Russia. So let's push Putin to the brink. So he's so surrounded by NATO and he's so closed off, he's got to do something. So let's force Putin to do something. So now we've got multiple conflicts going on again, which creates how many hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars?
You talking about military industrial complex money? Yeah,
Absolutely. Sure.
yeah,
Of course.
yeah.
Yeah. We know that the people running the government are not Biden, right? So we know that. So you've got what? Big pharma, big ag, the military industrial
Big
complex,
food.
food. Yeah. You don't the fact that people will agree that Biden is not actively running the country is terrifying. No one seems to care.
Yeah, this was never allowed before. I mean, like they had to when Roosevelt was in a wheelchair, they didn't show him. It was prohibited from being shown. Or Kennedy was taking very severe uh, barbiturates for his back problems and stuff. None of that was shown. Did you read the article a couple of days ago? I don't know if it was a journal or where they finally admitted that Joe
Wall
was
Street
not with it on
Wall
day
Street
one.
Journal. Yeah, Wall Street Journal.
Yeah,
I mean, they literally went back to the campaign
yeah,
and they said, well, Jill's out there in Iowa doing, 15 stops a day and no one's seen Joe. They're like, don't mention that because we don't want people to realize how bad Joe is. And Jill is making Joe look bad. I mean, it started that far. It started
yeah,
during the campaign.
yep,
And then they hit him in his basement. And that's why the pandemic was so perfect for these people. It was the absolute most perfect thing at the most perfect time. And Trump would have won in a landslide. The country was booming. People were tired of the Russia, Russia, Russia. People were tired of the Zelensky impeachment. People didn't care. The country was booming, right? They had to stop this man. And what really is so amazing is it backfired
yeah,
because he's twice as powerful in 2024 than he would have been in 2020. It
yep,
backfired on him.
yep. And if I mean, he had 4 years to figure out how to do the presidency right, as opposed to just being elected to the second term.
Yeah. And I think he's figured it out. I mean, yes, Elon Musk is a billionaire. Yes, Vivek is a billionaire. I mean, you've got some billionaires in his cabinet. Um, but he's really screwing up the narrative by having a bunch of women. He's got some gay guys.
Oh, wait a minute. He doesn't hire smart women, does he?
No, hates smart
So
women.
they're all
Hates.
dumb. They're
Ask Mark
cute and dumb.
Cuban. Mark Cuban will tell you he
Yeah,
hates.
yeah,
So
yeah,
he's and the amazing thing is the man has surrounded himself by smart women for 50 years,
yeah,
right? But it comes back to like what you're saying. I mean, the media is to watch MSNBC crumble is one of the highlights of my life. It's a joy to watch what's happening to MSNBC. It's it's a joy.
Well, one of the unintended positive consequences of this election is mainstream media has lost 100% of its credibility.
Yeah.
So if they've got to think twice about, do I want, if I'm MSNBC, do I want to have a potential audience of 10% of the population? How am I going to make money?
Yeah. And their core, what, the 25 to 64 is down like 80%.
Yeah,
And there's this talk about Elon buying MSNBC, and I'm like, Elon, why would you want that piece of garbage? Just
yeah,
blow it, let it die a slow death.
right.
But buying CNN would actually be pretty brilliant because CNN is still an actual news organization around the
Right,
world, right? I mean, they've gotten rid of millions of reporters because they don't report anything. But I mean,
right.
but still, CNN, I think, has the guts to become what Ted Turner had built
Yep.
back in the day. But MSNBC was never a news organization, so
No,
it why buy it? It's a piece of
right,
garbage.
right. I agree. It would be good to buy CNN.
It would. I think he could turn if he brought it back to a new he's talking about doing a Google, right? Like doing an X search to
Yeah.
replace Google. You heard that. And then like instead of, Michael Anderson at gmail.com, he's going to do Michael Anderson at x.com. So he
Yeah.
wants to start his own Google and his own Gmail account type of thing. So people like, oh, he's only close to Trump, so he could keep making more money and doing all this stuff. Well, a lot of this stuff is good.
I haven't seen anything he's done that's been bad. I mean, SpaceX thing. I mean, Boeing couldn't even come back and go back and get the astronauts because their rocket didn't work. And you got every automaker in the country. Rivian's losing $109,000 per vehicle they sell. Elon has the only profitable electric car company. I mean,
And he has the only batteries that make sense. And the other
yeah,
thing is, Biden had this garbage infrastructure bill that was so full of pork and green garbage. It's a worthless,
yeah,
worthless bill. It's
yeah.
it's it's incredibly bad. So they want to give everybody, especially the DEI and the disadvantaged, need to have internet, right? So they're going to run this internet, and I think they've run like 1 mile for $800 billion. And here's Starlink. It's like, dude, I could give the entire country internet in 5 minutes, and it would cost pennies, but that would make a win for the guy who is now the enemy of the left, right? And you
Well,
can't let them to win.
you saw the data. They allocated $15 billion for the last mile, and they've done 5 houses or something. And Elon won part of the bid, and then they reneged on him. They said he really wasn't competitive because they made up they took his numbers and multiplied them by some factor that made him not competitive.
Yeah. So in your book, America's Counterfeit Democracy, I mean, is it the Davos crowd? Is it the World Economic Forum crowd? I mean, who really who really is the power behind what's going on now? Who do you think is really running this
Well,
country right now?
let's go back 3 decades or so, and start with the changing demographics of the parties. Because and Trump is directly related to this because the Democratic Party through neoliberal philosophy began to abandon white middle class men, and so they punted that constituency in favor of the rich guys in Silicon Valley as they grew. So the white middle class men were an open constituency that had no representation, and Trump jumped in and took them, which is why they're so loyal to him. They have nobody else, they only have him. So the change to the Silicon Valley philosophy, which is neoliberal, is the change to the World Economic Forum philosophy for the Democratic Party. Project 2030, which is a WEF plan, Biden signed off on it. You probably know that. So if those dudes were in control going forward here, that's where we'd be going. And that's actually one of my future books is the globalist conspiracy to totalitarianism, because that's what their goal is. I mean, eat bugs, nobody owns anything. You know the drill. 1984.
Eat eat bugs, have nothing, and you'll like it.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Basically, it's the deal. And that's why it was so incredible when the group speech of the media, which is it's just they all get the same talking points at the same time throughout the whole country. It's bizarre. Um, but the 2025 thing that they all jumped on was
yeah,
just so it was so perfectly timed and such perfect crap, right? It's like
yeah.
you have Joy Reid doing an entire episode on Project 2025, and you think, dude, don't you even read anything? Do you know anything about anything?
But you know what? And you'll laugh when I say this because one of my platitudes is the left always accuses the right of doing what they're doing. So they have a Project 2025 plan themselves, but the right doesn't. The right is not that interested in it. It's an individualist mindset. let me live my life. I don't subscribe to some radical ideology, whatever it is. We go to church. I have cookouts with my neighbors. I watch sports. That's my life. It's not changing the government, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, the goal of any neoliberal globalist is this wonderful 1984 where uh, all the laws are made by NGOs and there's no accountability. So it's basically globalism against the nation state. And they would love to remove the nation state from the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. What's what are they going to do with currency? What do you think they're going to do with money?
Digital.
Yeah. They have to, right, to get rid of
Yeah.
the debt or
Well, they can do what China does, and then they can just, if you misbehave, they cut off your allowance for that month.
yeah.
They control your bank account.
Yeah. I love the fact that everyone was okay with an $87 billion budget and 80,000 more IRS agents to go after millionaires and billionaires.
Yeah.
But no one had a problem with you now going after my Venmo or PayPal for under $600, right?
Yeah.
It's like, don't you, doesn't that, that's okay with you? I mean, they're weaponizing the IRS and they're going after your $30 you give to your gardener or your housekeeper, your $70. They're going after that. But they're saying they're doing it to go after millionaires and billionaires, and you're agreeing with it.
Right. That's the biggest one of the biggest lies of all time. That the secret is collecting money from billionaires and we'll be solvent. You know, the top 1% pays 65% of the insurance income tax right now. And they have a army of accountants and lawyers working on their behalf to minimize their tax liability because they pay so much taxes.
Yeah. So
So,
you have 50% of the country that doesn't pay taxes because
yeah,
they don't make enough money.
right.
You have the 1% paying, that a portion that you said.
Yeah.
So who makes up the difference, right? The middle class gets hammered more and more and more, and then you've got the guys like Biden to step up and say, "We're for the little guy." I mean,
Right.
I heard a great podcast. Uh, the Teamster guy who spoke to the RNC,
Yeah.
he was on a podcast. I think it was Tucker. I can't remember. And it was such an I wasn't going to listen to it. I go, oh, that guy was kind of a douchebag. I don't want to listen to that guy, right? But it was very interesting about what he said and about what they're trying to do and what the Democrat Party did to him. Where Kamala literally showed up, like all the candidates do, to answer 16 questions for them and spend 2 hours. They're spending 2 hours to go through 16 questions. She answered three, kind of, and then she said, "I'm leaving. I'm not going to answer anymore." And
And
she
the
put
three were a word salad, right?
it totally. Yeah, it was like they were complete. They wasn't even answering the question, right? And they had the questions. They had the questions for like 2 weeks,
Yeah, but
and
she never
so
answers the question. So
never.
what's
And then
new?
she stopped at three and said, "I'm leaving" after 20 minutes. And then she puts her finger in one of the people's chests and says, "You better get behind us because we're going to win with or without you, and you don't want to be on the other side."
Whoops.
And they were shocked that that came flying out of her pie hole. And then they just left. And Trump was there for like 3 hours and then does a news conference with them and then buys them all McDonald's. And you wonder why they liked him more.
Right.
They're so condescending. I think, like you said before, it's like you're too stupid to know how bad everything is, right? Everything's great. You're just too stupid. You're going to eat bugs and you like it. And if you don't just completely do what we say, then we're going to keep squeezing it. We're going to keep putting down the screws on you until you finally break. And
Yep.
that's democracy because we're protecting democracy. I love it. I love it. Well, America's counterfeit democracy, rule of the power elites. I've got to pick it up. I'm sorry I didn't get it before. Um, But I mean, is there an answer, Michael? Are we just on a train and after Trump's gone, there's nothing, there's no speed bumps for these guys? Is
Well,
there any answer?
MAGA's got to continue under JD, is I think the short-term formula. But like I said very early in our conversation, we got to fix tribalism before we can fix the billionaires because the people still have the power if they would exercise it at the voting booth and not be influenced by the media. My favorite story about that is everybody talks about term limits or age limits. Let's throw the old people out. But when they get in the ballot voting booth, they go, well, I kind of like my guy, so I'll let everybody else throw their guy out. And then nobody gets thrown out. But the secret formula is you have to throw them out during the primaries. You've got a new Democrat running against the incumbent in the primary. You got to dump the incumbent there because you're not a Democrat's not going to dump a Democratic finalist against a Republican. They're not going to purposely elect a Republican. You got to do it in the primaries. So we need a grassroots effort or some kind of organizational approach to using the power of the vote, which is the remaining power we have.
Or you could just do like the people running the Biden administration, just put Kamala in there and don't have a primary. Just say,
Right.
forget it. We're just going to put
Yeah.
our gal. I mean, they might just do that in California. I mean, they might
Right.
just have Newsom step down and appoint Kamala Harris and make her governor of California
Yeah.
so that he can go run for president. I mean, that's how crazy these this
Yeah.
things are going right now.
Yeah. I've
Um,
never cared that much about that. Like, we got primaries because the smoke filled rooms seemed illegit. Who cares how they pick their candidate? Because if you do a bad job picking your candidate, it's not going to get elected. So,
yeah.
unfortunately, you may not have heard the stat. If you and I are running against each other and I spend more money than you do, I have a 90% chance of winning. That was true until this election. Kamala spent 2 billion and still couldn't get over the hump. It's an amazing counter story.
It really is because there was a young lady, Lily something, a gal who was deep in the campaign, the Harris campaign, and she just came out. I think she
I
was on
saw her.
CNN. Did you see that?
Yeah,
And she's like, she said 2.5 billion. She goes, they
yeah.
literally just lit $2.5 billion in cash on fire, and, and I got nothing for it. It's and then you see the media on the left keep spinning harder and harder. Well, he didn't get as many votes. He didn't win as much as a popular vote. It was a lot
It
closer than
wasn't a landslide, it was a squeaker.
yeah, it was a complete squeaker. And you look at the map and you go, dude, every single state went more red than has ever gone. That's a landslide. I'm sorry. You can do whatever you want with the numbers, but if every state, more people voted red than blue percentage wise than they have in the past, that's a movement. I'm sorry. It just is, right?
I just wrote an article about that on Substack, and I'd be happy to give you a free subscription my Substack if you'd like it. But the title of the article was called "Life with Magic Mushrooms," and it talked about the most recent articles in the Wall Street Journal. I forget who quoted that, where they interviewed three luminaries from the Harris campaign about how things went, and they said we actually won because it could have been a landslide and we prevented it, so we won.
That is some quality spin right there.
Yeah,
I
really.
swear that is, and I'm sure the media ran with that. I'm sure,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was a headline on every other. How many? I know people like to blame Fox as being, the one last bastion of right wing, but they're no longer. Ever since Roger Ailes died, they're no longer the right wing bastion. I don't.
No, they aren't.
Is there any middle of the road? Not even right. I mean, is there any middle of the road media left?
Yes, but I'll have
BBC.
to refer you. Well, the Wall Street Journal's pretty center,
Mm-hmm.
hair to the right, maybe. Um, I have a subscription to a site. Um, I can't remember the name of it right now.
Is it Hillsdale
Oh, it's called
College?
no, it's called All Sides. All
Also.
Sides.
Mhm.
And I'll send you a link to it. But basically, on a monthly basis, they produce a chart which shows the political leanings of all major news organizations, left, right, center, and you can see there's MSNBC's way on the left, Fox is on the right, Newsmax is on the right, and then you can see who's in the center. The networks are all left, not as far left as CNN, et cetera. But the data for that comes from surveys of the public. So they'll have like New York Times, and they'll have like 10,000 people vote on how they stand, and they take the consensus. And
Hmm.
this is a constant action evaluating the positioning of the media. And I find it very useful. I've had it in two of my books because it shows you. I mean, in my tribalism book, I made a comment that 92% of the evening news is on the left. Fox is on the right, 8%. Because if you add up NBC, ABC, NPR, CNN, MSNBC, all those, it's 92%. So
Why are we still funding NPR?
no sane Republican can imagine why. I don't know, because it's a lefty tool and they don't want to lose any of their tools. That's the only thing I can think.
But it's gone so I used to listen to it all the time in the 80s because I
Me
used to
too.
have to commute, right? And so I
Yep.
listened to it a lot. And
Yep.
I hadn't listened for a long time because it just got so impossible to listen to. And I'm not a righty crazy, right? I'm on both sides. If you give
Yeah.
me a good argument on either side that makes sense to me, I'm like, I can go there, right?
Yeah.
I'm not an
Yeah.
ideologue on either side, but so I was taking care of my mother-in-law's home because she was sick. She was living with us. I had to go there and feed the dogs and yada yada. And to keep a radio on so it made like someone was there, right? She kept the radio on all the time. She had NPR on. And while I'm feeding the dogs, I'm listening to this madness going, what happened? Holy cow. I mean, there were people on there. This was like 2001 or something. There were people on there on NPR, you know, total support of Black Lives Matter, total support of Antifa, total support of burning down our cities. Um, I was in shock. What happened?
They supported burning down cities because they enjoyed the smell.
According to Tim Waltz's
Wife, yeah.
wife, I
Yeah.
love the smell of burning tires in the morning. I always, I
She was
always
serious.
She was, man, did we dodge a bullet? I'm
Really.
sorry. I mean, you could absolutely despise Trump. You could have the most Trump derangement centers on the planet, but if you don't think we didn't dodge a bullet on this one, guys, I don't know what to tell you, man. We just did, but all right. Well, America's counterfeit democracy, tribalism, the conservative gene. We got the problem gene. Is it no the progressive gene?
Right.
Highlight of the American experiment. I mean, you've got some great work, Michael, especially since you're a newbie. I mean, I can't believe you've all done all this just since 2017. It's really impressive, and you know, most engineers, just don't think like this, and it's interesting. And so this just came out in September. America's Counterfeit
September
Democracy.
28th. Yep.
Okay. All right. Cool. We're gonna have to. We'll post all these books on the podcast. Um, links to all your stuff on the podcast, and this has just been so wonderful. I'm grateful for your time, but I always ask one last question before I let my guests escape. And the last question I ask could be about anything. You can go anywhere you want with it, but I always ask my guests if there's something you want to leave the audience with a quote that you loved or that you have or whatever. I mean, if there's something that means something to Michael C. Anderson and he wants to share it with us, what was that last thought be?
It would be to tell Americans that consensus, we must have consensus to drive our country forward. And all of this tribal arguing serves no purpose and destroys our society. So stop. Talk to a Democrat or talk to a Republican. And when you do that, you'll understand they're nice people like you are, and they have a reasonable view of the world. They're not radical.
I have one last question, and I forgot to ask it to you early, so I'm sorry. You have time for one last question?
Sure.
Okay. And this comes from a podcast I saw that you were on. Oh, what do you think, in your humble opinion, is more dangerous right now to this tribalism? Is it this constant push about racism, the constant push about transgenderism and sexualization, or is it the constant push about uh, you know, rich versus poor, trying to divide us? What do you think are they pushing the hardest to try to divide us with?
Well, I think cultural and social issues are a sideshow. I mean, they're very important to the left, but the real big game is the economy. I mean, it's basically the welfare state, big government spending money for handouts versus smaller government, control of government. I mean, the Dodge thing is going to be very important because this has never been attempted before. And any Democrat that states that this is a dumb idea to try and get the government more efficient is should not be listened to or hold office because it's a problem for everybody. $35 trillion debt is enormous, and we're about to reach a critical point with our debt. So it's the economy, stupid, really. It's how do we spend our money? And it's basically our money that's going to the government. So when the government wastes money, they waste our money. It's not their money. They don't care.
Have have people been numbed down by billions and trillions? I mean, do you think people just they hear that Gavin Newsom lost can't can't find $24 billion in homeless spending? It just I don't know where it all went. I don't know. Don't worry about it. I mean, if people lost touch with how much money $1 billion and $1 trillion is,
I don't know, but I mean, what you made me think of when you said that is the percentage of Americans that aren't engaged with politics at all. It's probably 30%. Don't vote, don't watch any political commentary, don't know the difference between the parties, whatever. They're not engaged. And then there's the next group that's minimally engaged, but they're very nervous because they don't understand what's happening and they don't know how to control it. So there's a large percentage of the population that we could use on our behalf to create consensus if we could motivate them, but that's never the way in human society. There's always a large percentage that are trying to live their lives, and it's probably a struggle to do it. So that's full-time occupation.
yeah, and that's kind of where they like us is
Yeah.
in that. And then you add to that the indoctrination in the schools. You've got mom and dad who are just trying to get by, and you've got kids who are being raised by the schools in the indoctrination camps. And then, you could see how smart they were back, 60, 70 years ago to put all this in place, and they're reaping the rewards of it now. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, when I first heard school officials say to parent groups, "Well, you don't have control of your kids, we do. You can't say what's in their classroom. You're not teachers. We're the ones that do." And you know what? This is interesting because I didn't understand it for a long time. You know how this drag queen stuff came up and everything? And all of a sudden it came out of nowhere, like the trans thing did. And I wondered to myself, now, what prompted the school systems to have drag queens scheduled? Okay. Do you know the answer? It's
No.
because the federal government tied that to their DEI money. And they said, if you don't bring these groups into the school, we're going to cut you off. Department of Education.
And then they put them in the military, and then
Yep.
they put it in the government, and they
Yep.
made this. Yeah, I was talking to a young lady. I did a podcast with a really brilliant young lady who is a therapist, psychologist, and works mostly with men because the struggle with masculinity in our country is so massive. I mean, dudes are completely lost. Should I
Yep.
be feminine? Should I be masculine? I don't want to be mean. I don't know. Should I do the dishes? Should I, start wearing women's clothes around the house? I don't know, you know, and it's a
Well, I mean,
real problem.
just a regular masculine men are having trouble because they take abuse all the time. And they're, graduate from college, have a large debt. They're living at home with their parents and they play video games in the basement. They never date. It's crazy.
Yeah. And they get Grubhub to bring them,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
junk food. So they have zero testosterone in their body.
Right.
Their BMI is at 50. Um, and they don't have any intellectual thought processes. I know 30-year-olds that don't want to drive.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I stole my mom's car at 12. I mean, I
Yeah.
couldn't wait to drive.
Yep.
How do you not want to drive? How do you not want to leave your house or your parents' basement? It's so bizarre to me. And that's what I was saying. I mean, I literally think maybe that's a book there, but I'm not smart enough to write a book. But there's a lost generation there
Yep.
of, I don't know if it was from social media. I don't know, is it from the final indoctrination of it? I don't know if it was the food that we're putting into these kids. I don't know if it was the breaking up of the families, but there's a lost generation of kids that it's like from 18 to 30 that are just a mess. And I don't know they're going to come out of it. The only great news is that it seems like the generation below them, 20 like 18-year-olds are
The alpha
are
generation. Let's
they're
see.
a lot more engaged. They're a lot more engaged. So I
Gen
maybe there's hope. I don't know.
Gen Z is 2012 to date. Wait a minute. It's Gen X is 80 to 96, Gen Y, which is the millennials, 96 to 12, and Gen Z is 2012. So they'd be 12 years old. And that may be the group you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's a lost generation, but in my humble opinion. So, Michael Anderson, I could talk to you forever. Love all your stuff. You've been super amazing. I love tribalism. I just think, man, everyone should read that because, like the great Rodney King said, why can't we all just get along? I mean,
Right.
honestly, if we don't start working on realizing who we should all be conscientious of, of watching who's really doing this. And the only way we're gonna to survive this is if we get along.
Yep.
We
Exactly.
just have to. And America's Counterfeit Democracy, Rule of the Power Elite. Love that too. We could talk about that all day. But all right, Michael, thank you so much.
Okay.
Everybody, this was the amazing Michael C. Anderson. We're gonna post all of his books. We're gonna post the links to his blogs and his newsletters and his websites so that everyone can be exposed to Michael. And maybe he can help us all get along and fix some stuff because I don't want to eat bugs and have nothing and like it.
Right.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much. I
All right.
appreciate
See you
it.
later.
See you guys. Thanks. Another episode of the What If You Could podcast. See you next time. Bye. All right, my friend. That was great.
Okay.
I
You want to get
appreciate.
on my Substack?
Do I want to do what?
Do you want to get on my Substack?
What is that?
Substack is it's a site that I'm surprised you've never heard of it, where creators create articles and publish them. So I write about politics and I write a paper every week on Substack.
Where do you find it?
Substack.com, but I will send you a link to get to my Substack.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love it.
And I
Yeah,
can
I'd love
give
to
you a
read it.
free subscription. So what the way it works is you get whenever an article is published, It's emailed to you, so you don't have to find it. You can open it up, decide if you want to read the article. If you don't, then delete it. So it's a great tool. It's where the creators are going now, basically.
Wow. Yeah, I'd love to see that. I hate to get stuff for free. I really don't. I don't like to get stuff for free, but I'd love to take a look at one and I'm grateful for that. Yeah, if you want to send me a link to that, I'd
Well,
love
there's a
that.
you can subscribe. It's $50 a year for a subscription, but you don't have to. You
All
can
right. Well, if you
just
send that, let me just
read the
look at a
free
couple.
ones.
Sure. The other thing is, are your books? I didn't see the link. Are they all on Amazon and all that stuff? So when we link it,
Yes.
or where do they get
Yep.
your books?
Yep. You go
Okay.
right to the purchasing it with the link.
Perfect. So we'll make sure we put that link on there so you get that because I am going to pick up America's Counterfeit Democracy. That just really
How
intrigued.
do you like to read the print or the ebook?
Only print, baby.
Okay.
I have to hold a book in my hand.
Oh my God, I love you. Because I talked to somebody about that recently, and I mean the younger generation, they don't even read ebooks, they just want to have audiobooks. But this person said to me, "Why do you how could you why do you want to hold a book physically?" And I said, it's an emotional experience. I'm holding it, but also I make notes in all my books because if I'm reading like a political book, I don't want, and it's 500 pages. I don't want to find some quote 2 months later that is impossible to find. I don't want to read the book again to find one quote. So they're all marked up.
My wife laughs at me because I read every book with a highlighter.
Yeah,
It's like, what do you, why you've read the book? Why are you highlighting it?
right.
Because that stuck out to me, and I want to be able to recall that.
Yep,
And I don't want to have 57 dog ears on my book because it's ruining all my books. So I
right.
read a book with a highlighter, and I just I have to have a book, and they're laying everywhere. Some because you never know what mood you're in, right? I mean, I've got 6, 7 books on my nightstand all the time, and there multiple are going because I don't maybe I don't want to pick up that one. I'll pick up this one. You know what I mean?
What
But
books do you have about conservatism?
I don't know. The last book I read, a political book, was I interviewed a fella named Dr. Mark McDonald,
No.
and he wrote 2 books, um, The United States of Fear, and the second book was Freedom of Fear. And he's a psychologist out of Los Angeles. And he wrote about what the psychosis of what happened with COVID and the lockdowns and how easily people were convinced as a group to just completely give up all their rights because the government told them to.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating. It's a little book, so that's probably the last book I read on politics. Right now, I'm reading 3 other books on different stuff. But why? What? Well, who was that Height guy? You said Height.
Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Height. Okay, I'm gonna look him up because that sounded interesting.
Here's the book here. The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion.
Okay, I'm gonna find that book. Yeah, so I'm gonna get that one, Righteous Mind, and I'm gonna definitely get America's Counterfeit Democracy, without a doubt. What state do you live in?
Ohio,
Ohio. Okay.
Columbus.
Columbus, Ohio.
And you're
Okay.
on the coast?
I'm in California, yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay.
Crazy town. California's
Crazy.
completely lost their mind. It's the most bizarre thing.
I,
I
I wrote an article called The Liberal, the Progressive Science Project, which basically was all about California. I mean, one
yeah,
advantage of our country is we have 50 states, so everyone can be a laboratory. And California is a laboratory for crazy progressives.
yeah.
And it's not going to work, I can tell them. I mean,
It's already crumbling.
yeah,
And the crazy thing is, I mean, it went harder red in 24 than it has in a long time, probably since Reagan. But it's a one party state,
yeah,
first of all. But it's not even a left state. it's like you said, it's a progressive experiment. And the guy that's coming up behind Gavin Newsom, unless somehow something happens to this guy, his name's Rob Bonta. He's our attorney general.
Hmm.
And this guy is so leftist, progressive, Marxist. It's beyond the imagination, right? And so the challenge is, Gavin Newsom is a typical old school, sleazy, corrupt Nancy Pelosi politician, right?
Yeah.
He could care less about anything
Isn't
as
he
long
her
as there's
nephew or
money.
something?
What's that?
He's her nephew or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Aunt Nancy. Okay,
Yeah.
so they're cut from the same cloth. So at least you know what you're getting with Gavin Newsom, right? But this Rob Bonta actually believes he's an idealist. He believes this stuff, this progressive Marxist stuff. So that's what makes him so much more dangerous than Gavin Newsom, right? Because you
Yeah.
can deal with a Gavin Newsom, but you can't deal with a guy who believes somehow all of this progressive Marxist crap should be no guns, no gas, no cars, no air conditioning. Everyone should be served by the government unless you're multiple, massively rich. Um, it's really scary. He's a scary guy. And he's right in line to be the governor of California in 2026, unless someone steps in. I don't know who. It's
Uh,
crazy.
what I find interesting about California writing that article is that since it's a one-party state, socialists can run against Democrats and win.
Yeah.
Like there's one assemblyman who's a socialist, and the mayor of Oakland is a socialist. So I mean, you actually could do socialism there.
Yeah. It's on its way.
Yeah.
Look into this Rob Bonta guy, who's the Attorney
Okay.
General of California. He is he is absolutely as scary as it comes because he is an idealist. He honestly, I think he believes this stuff. And Gavin Newsom doesn't have a soul. He has no rudder. He has no
Right.
anything. So he's easy. But anyway, all right, my friend. Well,
Wait, one
this
more thing I got
yeah
to tell you
yeah
because you'd
yeah.
be interested. Do you know why socialism never works? It's never worked in history. It's because when it gets to the transition point, it becomes totalitarianism. Every case. And I have a great book about that because deep down, the socialists do not want to use violence, and the totalitarians do.
Wow
So it's all set up by the socialists, but they're too nice to take the last step, but the totalitarians take it.
wow wow. Yeah, I mean that's. I almost think that's what 2020 was about. They turned to
Yeah.
violence. They
Yeah.
set it loose,
Yep.
and they were happy to do it because it served their objective. And it makes you wonder. There's not, what do we have? 28 days.
Yep.
It's going to be a crazy 28 days, my
There will
friend.
be. All right, sir. Have a great day.
You are awesome. Thank you so much,
See
Michael.
you.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.